Hello everyone, Aussies Elect here, and welcome back to the channel. First off, I just want to say thank you to all the people who have helped me reach my goal of not only 1.6k subscribers, but 1700 subscribers. So thank you everyone. I will be making a special video soon. I know I was going to do like a video on high-speed rail. I thought that it would be in Labour's budget, but of course I was wrong about that. I will still do a video on high-speed rail soon, but today I want to talk about what might be in Peter Dutton's budget. I honestly think this will be a lot more interesting than Albanese's budget. Of course, the tax cuts that Albanese and Chalmers announced in last night's budget was quite a big surprise, but they aren't huge tax cuts. As the mainstream media keeps on going on about, it's like $5 a week for the first year and then $10 a week for the second year. And I had a post on earlier criticizing the government for not instead increasing the tax-free threshold, which would not only help all taxpayers, but it would also help people who currently pay tax to not even pay any tax at all. It would bring a lot of people into the threshold where they wouldn't pay any income tax. And I think that would be good, considering that the tax-free threshold hasn't been risen in like over a decade, and they have this weird like low income tax offset thing instead, and they have like this Medicare levy. Like the whole income tax system could be simplified and made better for low income earners, but they didn't do that, of course. Yeah, we're not sure about what Dutton is going to announce tomorrow in his budget replies, but I have a few ideas, both from what I've heard around the place and also what I've just assumed from listening to what members of the opposition have said. So in this video, I'm going to announce 3 populist policies Dutton might be doing in tomorrow's budget reply and what I think about. So firstly, I want to touch on a post I made 4 days ago saying that there's a non-zero chance that Dutton will dump his big government nuclear policy in the budget reply. So a lot of people sort of criticized this idea. They said that like Dutton would look like a complete idiot and the stakes are too high. Basically, they're sort of like too far gone now to actually dump this policy, even if it sort of would be more popular if they did just sort of remove the ban policy. I mean, I did ask this question at the end, like, why didn't they just do this policy in the first place? And the reason that they have done this like $400 billion or $600 billion nuclear plan instead of just releasing the ban on nuclear energy in Australia is because there would be a guaranteed investor in the plan, and it would be the government. It means that they wouldn't have to rely on some private investor coming out and saying like, yeah, I'll invest in nuclear energy if they remove this ban. There's already an investor lined up. It's the federal government. It's the taxpayer. It means they don't have to rely on the private market doing this. And in an era where populism is becoming more popular, it doesn't really matter about the price tag on things. We've seen that during the pandemic. The coalition ran up massive deficits and massive debt, and nobody really seemed to mind about that fact. That wasn't really why Scott Morrison lost the election. I mean, that could be one aspect of why Scott Morrison lost the election, but that wasn't inherently the reason Morrison lost. In fact, he was polling pretty well when he was like spending like a ton of money. So I think the coalition think they can get away with just putting this like basically unlimited price tag and saying like it's for cost of living, it's an investment, we need to do something about energy, blah, 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 blah. And then obviously they, use their own numbers to say that renewables are going to be more expensive, and they say like there's going to be 1 billion power lines and stuff like that. But I guess why I've sort of come up with my own sort of thought bubbles about what Dutton is going to do and why I've sort of theorized a lot about how is Dutton going to change course, it's because Dutton, as I mentioned in my most previous video, has done a lot of things to become on the nose these last couple of weeks, and it's really getting desperate for him. He's falling back in the polls, his popularity is falling back, less and less people believe that his agenda is actually going to help them, and so he absolutely needs to change course at this point, and maybe he won't change course on the nuclear energy side of things. I predict he's going to go full steam ahead with this nuclear energy stuff, but there are other things that he could do. So the first one is that he could go back to cutting net migration again. So he used to have a policy about reducing net migration for, I think, a couple of years, like 2 years or something, to 160,000. Currently, net migration is like, I think at least like double that or something. But he walked back this policy and instead decided to do a 25% reduction on permanent migration, which is a reduction of about 180,000 to about 140,000. So it's only a 40,000 cut on population. It's not going to be much when a large amount of the immigrants which have come in the last couple of years have been temporary migrants. They've been student. And I don't know why he exactly dumped this policy, as I discussed in my last video. I think keeping with this and not really sort of explaining it would just be an amazing sort of populist idea to attract all of those people who in the last couple of years who have become conditioned to be blaming immigrants on the cost of living crisis, on the housing crisis, on traffic congestion, on infrastructure. It would absolutely appeal to those people, even if it didn't make much sense. I think maybe sort of the business community must have tapped him on the back, or maybe like the university sector or something like that. I don't know what happened, but it's getting desperate now. And I'm wondering if Peter Dutton is going to revisit this sort of cut to overseas net migration and pick maybe a number like 200,000 or 250,000, or just cut it to sort of some kind of level where he could seem reasonable, but he can also appeal to that group of populist voters who really want an immigration cut. He'll say that he's going to reduce the demand on housing, and that will offset another policy idea of his, which is mortgage tax breaks. So this is something I've actually suggested myself, to do tax breaks on the interests of mortgage. You could do something like you can take off like $1,000 worth of mortgage interest from your home loan a month off your tax, something like that. You could just restrict it to first homes or principal residences, or to people with under a certain amount of assets or a certain amount of income or something like that. The thing is, when I suggested that a policy like this might be a good idea, I said it was only a good idea in conjunction with also getting rid of tax concessions, such as lowering the capital gains tax discount or reforming negative gearing. It alone would be a very bad policy, because all it's going to do is inflate house prices for several reasons. The first reason is people who would have struggled with their mortgage and would have sold their houses because of it are no longer going to do that. So that's going to mean less sale of houses. There's less houses on the market, which is obviously going to increase the value of houses that are on the market. And the second reason is pure speculation. It's the idea that the government is always going to bail out the housing market when something is going wrong. At this point, it's just people are in so much debt that they feel like they need to sell. It's going to reassure investors that, yes, the government is always going to be here for you to bail out the housing market. And simply there's going to be an assumption that house prices are going to go up after this. It's basically offsetting the effect of quote unquote high interest rates on the housing market. So this will absolutely just completely rocket up house prices. And the people who will be happy about this kind of policy, of course, are people who own a home outright because their house prices are going to go up, or people with a mortgage because they're getting a mortgage tax cut and their house prices are going to go up. The people who are going to hate it is renters. But a lot of renters are already on Peter Dutton's side because they see the problem as immigration. They see that as the big problem why their rents are high. And so if Peter Dutton does this along with the promise of cutting migration, even the cut to permanent migration might be enough. That might be all it takes to get some renters on his side. He can say, oh, I'm not doing this to increase house prices. I'm just doing this to give people who have a mortgage some support. Meanwhile, to renters, he can posture, I'm going to reduce the demand on your housing, and therefore housing is going to, I don't know, plateau or something like that. Look, we all know that renters are going to be screwed, but maybe a lot of renters won't realize that because they just think that, I mean, like, immigration is the main thing that matters. It's not like overly generous tax concessions to investors. So this could be what Dutton does, and I think this would be a very popular but ultimately a very destructive policy if he decides to do this. And I don't know if Labour are really prepared to know what to do if Dutton announces this kind of policy. If they oppose it, I think they could just lose the election because people with mortgages will vote Dutton because they're in this much household stress at the moment. If Labour does support it, they still might win the election. But it does mean that Labour have basically guaranteed that the housing market is just going to absolutely balloon. If there's bipartisanship on this kind of policy and there's no other policy to reduce demand, and I don't think what Dutton plans to do here is going to work regardless if it's cutting permanent migration or net migration, but that's just my opinion. But regardless, without a serious cut to demand, such as getting rid of those tax concessions. Labour Party are just going to make house prices soar if they back Dutton's idea. Again, this is just a hypothetical. I don't exactly know what Dutton is going to do, but I guess we'll see. Now, the last idea is a national gas reservation policy, which is actually something that some crossbenchers such as Rex Patrick from the Jackie Lambie network have been pushing. And I said here that in this case, Labour would be stupid not to support it. I feel like probably there are people on both the left and the right who support this, but I think the way leftists view this policy is different to the way right-wing people view this policy. And I've got a very interesting comment here by Ross Baker 9721. I actually didn't reply to him because I knew I'd be sort of talking about his comment in this video. So basically what he's suggesting is that in order for the coalition to make this national gas reserve, they'll have to start fracking, drilling a lot more. Ordinarily, you would think like, oh, gas companies going to be so mad that they have to like reserve gas in Australia, blah, 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 blah. But gas companies would be very happy if the government supports them opening up more and more projects in order to get the more supply needed in order to have this domestic gas reservation policy. And the reason that you can't just like say like all that gas that we're currently exporting, let's just keep some of that, and that's because obviously we already have contracts with those people. So sort of the left-wing people would probably say, all right, well, no more projects, but once those contracts end, then we're going to keep some of that gas. Obviously, the right won't be happy with that because A, it means that they don't get to drill more, and B, they'll use the argument that then we'd have to wait to get more gas. They want to drill, baby, drill now. They don't want to wait until these contracts end. They want to get that gas now and stick it in the reservation policy. And I think Labour would, again, struggle to know what to do with this kind of policy, if they should support it or not. The Labour Party have tried to have it each way when it comes to environmental policy. A lot of the time, they try to say that they care about climate change, but whilst they're opening a whole lot of more coal and gas projects. So are they going to support the idea of opening up even more gas projects? Like the whole left side of politics, the whole green side of politics is absolutely going to go ballistic if the Labour Party support this. So the Labour Party might just support a sort of more moderate gas reservation where they wait for sort of contracts to end and then they fill up the reservation, or they end contracts, and obviously the coalition won't be happy with that because that means that you're giving a middle finger to business. There's also other ideas like the coalition sneakily paying double market rates for local extractors to sell into the reserve. Look, I don't really know about the fine details of this, but there's clearly good ways you could do this and there's bad ways you can do this. I think if the coalition are going to do this, they're going to do it in a way that will, at the end of the day, help benefit the gas industry the most. Maybe it might sort of reduce electricity prices a little bit for Australians, but the winners will always be the gas industry. Look, a lot of people since my last video have accused me of having a Labour bias or like a left bias, but I'm not biased towards any political party or any movement. I'm just biased towards good policy. And I'm sorry, but the coalition have had a serious deficit of good policy for a long time. As time goes by, it more and more seems like the coalition's policy is whatever suits big business, rich people, the status quo. It doesn't seem like they actually have sort of a vision for Australia. And with their immigration policy, they're sort of just tapping into populism in order to win an election. I don't actually think that Dutton would do anything with immigration if he got elected. I think he would find every excuse not to, because when he was immigration minister, there was over 200,000 coming into the country net overseas migration. And this was like 10 years ago when we didn't have as much of an aging population and we didn't need those immigrants as much as we do now. So I don't think Dutton actually cares about lowering immigration. I think every policy he has is simply to win an election. But the unfortunate thing about this mortgage tax breaks thing, this, as well as his policy of letting people raid their super to buy houses, I think these are things that he actually wants to do because coalition governments have always had an interest in keeping house prices high and increasing the price of houses. And if he can get away with doing policies that are just going to keep on doing that, they'll do it. Scott Morrison did that with Home Builder during the pandemic. We might have had a housing crash then if Scott Morrison didn't massively subsidize the housing industry with Home Builder, which absolutely pushed up the price of land. And this is before the borders open, so don't say it's got anything to do with immigration. And it might keep the, I don't know, 2/3 of Australians happy who own homes currently. But I don't think it's going to be good for our economy at all if house prices just keep on going up and up and up. So I'm really curious to hear what Peter Dutton's budget in reply is going to be. I honestly hope I'm wrong and that he's not going to go for this like awful populist approach in the budget reply. I really hope that he doesn't have the sort of cynical attitude that I think he does. And I think even more so, I'm interested to see how Labor is going to respond to whatever Peter Dutton does. I think this is what Labor were afraid of more than anything, more than delivering a deficit. I think Labor were afraid of what giving Peter Dutton a soapbox would allow him to promise for this election. If they didn't go to a budget, Peter Dutton wouldn't have got the soapbox of a budget reply. And so tomorrow we might be seeing why the Labor Party really wanted an election on April 12th instead of sometime in May. So thanks for watching, everybody. This was a bit of a different video this time around, but I just wanted to share my thoughts. I'd obviously been making a lot of posts about Dutton's budget reply, so I felt it was necessary to sort of bring it all together into one video. And I may be making a video after Dutton's budget reply to sort of like sum up how right I was and give my thoughts on it all, and how Albo's budget will compare to Dutton's budget for how it might affect the election. I know a lot of Labour people are currently quietly sort of smug about the idea that Dutton voted against these tax cuts, but I've always had the feeling that Dutton is a pretty shrewd strategist, and I've actually been surprised the last couple of weeks how much Dutton has sort of failed to nail the strategy. He's made a lot of mistakes. I have a feeling that when it comes to a budget reply, he's going to know what to do a lot better than a lot of these off the cuff policy ideas he's made. And I just think maybe some Labour people are being a little too comfortable at the moment with things, and maybe they should be a little worried about exactly what Dutton has to deliver tomorrow. Thanks for watching, everyone.